Can we dig into? I'm very curious to learn how the team is structured before and after you go from 300 to 1,000. So that give a different way for people to understand what are the changes are going to be made. Especially now you just mentioned there are people specific for a particular role. So can you dive into that a bit more?
Yeah, at the highest level, I actually think of it as two different types of teams. You have platform teams and you have product teams or business teams. And so, and I think it's important to recognize the type of team you are and the way the leaders need to operate. So you have the business teams that are at the front line of building customer features, but they can't do that unless you have your platform teams, right? Which is infrastructure or fraud or customer care, customer support. And what I often find is that you want or what works well is that you keep pushing things down. And so let's say that you have two of your business areas that need some common logic. It's more efficient to have a team that can build some common abstractions that help both teams. And so for us here, it's been a journey of evolving our teams, going all the way from that the initial structure to sort of this the product and the platform teams. And then I've talked about the technical programs organization, but we have that as well that kind of helps all of these teams.
I have a follow-up question about this. Is I think one of the questions I've been most excited to get your take on, because the growth experience from 300 to 1,000 is there. To me, it seems like there's a lot of complexities and nuances, especially as you are sort of stratifying different functions underneath that with platform, product, QA, data science, and all of these other sort of engineering functions. When you were going through, like, this evolution over the last 2 years, how did you think about or approach the org design or the planning process for these different things? Was it a continuous operation? Were there sort of distinct summits that you had with other engineering leaders on the team to start to architect what that looked like? And I guess, how did you balance those different functions as they were being built out?
Yeah, that's it's a good question. I think that you want to start by actually looking at, is there any glaring gap, right? Because as a new leader, um, and we haven't talked about this before, but you want to try to bet on internal talent where you can, and you need to give yourself enough time and runway to be able to develop talent. And so I think that it's important to start with, like, hey, is there any glaring gap where you need to actually hire someone from the outside, right? So for us, one example is when I started, we had this one, we had a debit card product, and we had two different teams that were working on it. And so teams themselves called out to me that, like, hey, I think we should, merge these into its own organization. And so that's what we decided to do. And then I hired a leader for that, right? Or there was another area where we didn't have a consolidated infrastructure organization. And so we consolidated that and hired a head of infrastructure. And so I think that I would say it's a journey. It's important to pace yourself. And then sometimes you actually and again, like, there's no one single playbook here, but I would say that, like, a strategy that I used initially, because I wanted to work on seeing which teams were able to scale, is I had a slightly flatter organization, and then I worked on narrowing it. And this just gave me some time to be able to look at different areas, and organizations are living and breathing. They're going to keep evolving. And so I do think that, for me, I think of it as a 2-year journey. It's not something that I came in and I said on day one, all right, like, this is the end state and how do I get there as quickly as possible? I think you have to really kind of keep evolving the structure and try to not outpace kind of where the organization is or what it needs.
A quick follow up on the flat team structure. Is that true that early on, keep it flat will save the space for later on going narrow and be more hierarchical once you have no more understanding of what you need. Because I can imagine the reverse of that, from a hierarchical, more deep org structure to a more flat one, requires more churn, because almost can be perceived as a reorg versus adding on more layers of into the org structure as needed, because that reflects the maturity of certain parts of an organization.
Yeah, I would say that overall kind of org structure scaling, it's always a point in time. Like you can look at it as being 300 to 1,000 engineers, but in 2 years we could be, I don't know, 2,000 engineers. And then you could say, okay, like, are you flat or hierarchical in the 1,000 to 2,000? And so I really think that um, it is a journey. And what's important is that you feel you have the right leaders and the right roles. And especially in periods of hyper growth, like people's roles are changing every 3 to 6 months. Like it is changing so quickly that people might not even know their own sort of interest, or they might say that, hey, like this role is no longer fun for me. Right. And so I think that being a little bit flatter, I think, gave me the ability to just to work with different leaders and help grow them, and help understand their own interests. And so I do think that, a lot of people say, like, ideally you should have six to no more than eight kind of direct reports. And I do think it's a good goal to have. But I think, Jerry, to your point, like if you are scaling very quickly and you are very hierarchical, it does give you lesser dimensions in which you can make changes, and it would feel like a more massive reorg.
Yeah, and also requires more coordination if there's more middle layers, right? It's more flat structure in certain way. If you can have the capacity, it's more efficient. Like you have a central hub, so to have a direct communication with all the nodes.